The maintenance corridor of Gateway Station never saw much foot traffic after the third shift ended. That's exactly why Beth liked it. Her repair shop sat wedged between a defunct water reclamation unit and a storage bay that nobody had opened in 5 years. The rent was cheap, the landlord never asked questions, and she could work in peace with nothing but the hum of the station's life support systems for company. She was elbow deep in a mining drone's propulsion system when she heard the shuffling. 3 sets of feet, small and hesitant, stopping just outside her open doorway. Beth didn't look up right away. Kids sometimes wandered through here, usually looking for shortcuts or hiding from station security after swiping snacks from the market level. "We're closed," she called out, still focused on reconnecting a series of corroded wires. The footsteps didn't retreat. Instead, she heard a small voice, speaking in heavily accented Galactic Common. "Please? You fix things?" Beth sighed and set down her tools, wiping her hands on her already stained coveralls. When she turned around, she found 3 alien children standing in her doorway. They couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old in human terms, though she'd never seen their species before. They had pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer slightly under the harsh corridor lighting, large dark eyes, and delicate features that made them look almost fragile. What caught her attention more than their appearance was their condition. Their clothes were dirty and torn in places. Dust covered their bare feet. One of them had a scrape across their arm that looked a few days old. "Where are your parents?" Beth asked, gentler this time. The smallest one, a girl with her hair falling loose around her face, just shook her head. The tallest, a boy who was probably the oldest of the 3, stepped forward and held out something in his hands. It was a mechanical bird, beautifully crafted but clearly broken. One wing hung at an odd angle, and the internal mechanisms were exposed where a panel had come loose. "Can you fix?" he asked again. Beth took the bird carefully, turning it over in her hands. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, far better than anything she usually saw on the station. The materials alone were probably worth more than she made in a month. These weren't the kind of toys that refugee kids carried around. "Where did you get this?" she asked, suspicious now. The 3 children exchanged glances, and the middle one, another boy with wide nervous eyes, spoke up. "Is ours. Please fix." Their Galactic Common was barely functional, and they seemed genuinely distressed. Beth looked at the mechanical bird again, then at the children's hopeful faces. She thought about turning them away, about the complications that might come from getting involved. Then she thought about how her own daughter used to look at her with that same desperate hope when her favorite stuffed animal needed surgery. That was before the accident. Before Beth ended up alone on a station halfway across the galaxy, fixing other people's broken things because she couldn't fix what really mattered. "Come on in," she said, stepping aside. "Let's see what we've got here." The children filed in, and Beth noticed they were each carrying something. The girl had a holographic puzzle box that flickered and died every few seconds. The nervous boy clutched a small hovering sphere that was clearly supposed to float but instead dragged along the ground like a deflated balloon. Beth cleared a workspace on her cluttered bench and pulled up 3 stools. "Sit. Let me look at these." She started with the mechanical bird because it seemed the most important to them based on how carefully the oldest boy had carried it. The internal gyroscope was misaligned, and several of the microservos had been jammed with what looked like sand. Not station dust, actual sand. Interesting. As she worked, the children watched in complete silence, barely moving. It was unnatural how still they were, like they'd been trained to sit without fidgeting. Every now and then, one of them would glance at the doorway nervously. "You kids hungry?" Beth asked without looking up from her work. More glances between them. Finally, the girl nodded slightly. Beth jerked her thumb toward a small cooling unit in the corner. "There's sandwiches in there. Help yourselves. Don't touch the blue container though, that's coolant, not juice." The oldest boy hesitated, then went to the cooler. He pulled out the paper bag with Beth's lunch and looked at her questioningly. She nodded. "Go ahead. I'll grab something from the market later." They ate like they hadn't seen food in days, though their table manners were impeccable despite their hunger. They split everything evenly among themselves without arguing, and they cleaned up after themselves without being asked. Definitely not typical station kids. Beth got the bird working first. When she activated it and the wings began to move with smooth precision, the oldest boy gasped. The bird lifted from her palm, circled once around the shop, and landed on his outstretched hand. His eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely audible. The puzzle box took longer. The holographic projector had a burned-out emitter that Beth had to replace with a salvaged part from her spare bin. It wasn't a perfect match, but when she powered it on, the colorful geometric shapes sprang to life above the box. The nervous boy grabbed it and held it to his chest like she'd just returned his best friend. The hovering sphere was the easiest fix, just a depleted power cell. Beth swapped it out, and the sphere immediately floated up to ceiling height, bobbing gently. The little girl laughed, the first sound of joy Beth had heard from any of them. She jumped up and guided the sphere around the room with graceful hand movements, and for a moment she looked like any happy kid in the galaxy. When all three toys were working, Beth set down her tools and looked at the children. "Okay, who wants to tell me what's really going on here? Where are you from?" They went quiet again. The oldest boy looked at his siblings, then back at Beth. We ran away. Just for one day. Want to see station. See normal people." "Ran away from who?" Beth pressed. "Handlers," the girl said like that explained everything. It didn't, but Beth decided not to push. They were clearly in some kind of care situation, maybe an orphanage or a group home. They'd slipped away for an adventure and would probably catch hell when they got back. "How much?" the oldest boy asked, reaching into his pocket. "How much what?" "To pay." "For fixing." Beth waved him off. "Nothing. Keep your money. Buy yourselves a decent meal when you get back to wherever you came from." The children stared at her like she'd just spoken in a language they'd never heard before. The boy's hand remained frozen halfway to his pocket. A no payment?" he asked slowly. "It's just toys, kid. I'm not going to charge children for fixing toys." Beth stood up and stretched, her back popping. "But you three need to get back before someone starts looking for you. Station security doesn't mess around with lost kids." They didn't move. They just kept staring at her with those enormous dark eyes, holding their repaired toys like treasures. Finally, the little girl stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Beth's waist in a quick, fierce hug. Then all three of them bowed deeply and formally before hurrying out of the shop. Beth watched them disappear down the corridor, their hovering sphere bobbing above them like a tiny beacon. She felt that familiar ache in her chest, the one that showed up whenever she thought about her own daughter. Then she shook her head, turned back to her workbench and picked up the mining drone she'd been working on. Just another day on Gateway Station. Nothing special. Nothing that would change anything. She had no idea how wrong she was. 4 days passed before Beth's quiet life fell apart. She was replacing the hydraulic line on a cargo loader when she heard boots in the corridor. Not the usual shuffle of station workers or the quick steps of merchants heading to the market levels. These were synchronized, military-precise footsteps that echoed off the metal walls like a drum corps. Beth looked up from her work just as her doorway darkened. 6 figures stood there, each wearing armor that looked like it cost more than her entire shop. The armor was deep purple with silver accents, polished to a mirror shine. Each guard carried a weapon that hummed with barely contained energy. "Beth Brennan?" The voice came from the tallest guard, a woman whose face was hidden behind a reflective visor. Beth's heart kicked into overdrive. She kept her nose clean on this station for 3 years. Paid her fees on time, never dealt in stolen goods, always filed the proper paperwork. What could she possibly have done to warrant this kind of attention? "That's me," she said, setting down her tools slowly, keeping her hands visible. "Is there a problem?" The guards parted and a new figure stepped through. This one wasn't wearing armor. Instead, he wore flowing robes in the same purple and silver colors, with intricate embroidery that probably had some kind of significance Beth didn't understand. He was tall and thin, with pale blue skin that immediately reminded Beth of those 3 kids. "Miss Brennan," the robed figure said, his galactic common perfect and formal. "I am Chancellor Vorin of the Kelvorian Empire. I must speak with you regarding a matter of grave importance." Beth's mind raced. Kelvorian Empire. She'd heard of them, one of the big 3 powers in this sector, but she'd never had any reason to deal with them directly. "Look, if this is about permits or taxes or something, I can show you my records. Everything's legal." "This is not about permits," the Chancellor said, stepping into her shop. He looked around at the cluttered workspace with barely concealed distaste. 4 days ago you encountered 3 children in this establishment. Is this correct?" "The kids." "Oh no." Beth's stomach dropped. Had something happened to them? Were they in trouble? Was she in trouble for helping them? "Yeah, 3 kids came by. They had some broken toys. I fixed them. That's what I do, I fix things." "And you charged them nothing for this service?" the Chancellor continued, watching her carefully. "They were kids. They looked like they needed a break. It was just toys, it took me maybe an hour." "What's this about? Are they okay?" Something that might have been surprise flickered across the Chancellor's face. "You truly do not know who they were." "Should I?" The Chancellor clasped his hands behind his back. Those three children are Crown Prince Davith, Prince Kellen, and Princess Amara. They are the offspring of Emperor Theron IV, ruler of the Kelvorian Empire and sovereign of 73 worlds. Beth sat down hard on her work stool. You're joking. Kelvorians do not joke about matters of royal lineage, Miss Brennan. But they were dirty. Their clothes were torn. They looked like street kids. They had escaped their security detail during a diplomatic visit to this station. They wished to experience what the prince described as normal life for precisely 4 hours before they were discovered missing. The Chancellor's tone suggested he still didn't approve of this adventure. During their absence, they visited the market levels, a viewing port on the lower decks, and your establishment. Beth's mind struggled to process this. Those three scared, hungry kids were royalty? The toys I fixed, the bird and the puzzle box and the sphere. Family heirlooms, passed down through 17 generations. Each worth approximately 40 million credits. Beth's vision tunneled for a moment. 40 million. She'd handled them like they were cheap market trinkets. She'd used salvaged parts. What if she'd broken something? What if she'd made them worse? Miss Brennan? The Chancellor stepped closer. Are you unwell? I think I need to sit down. I'm sitting down. I need to sit down more. The Chancellor made a small gesture, and one of the guards produced a small flask. Water. Please drink. Beth took it with shaking hands and drank. The water was cold and tasted faintly sweet. After a moment, her head cleared a little. Am I in trouble? I didn't know. I swear I didn't know who they were. You are not in trouble, the Chancellor said, and his tone softened slightly. Quite the opposite. The children returned to their quarters with their repaired treasures and immediately told their father about the kind mechanic who helped them and refused payment. Emperor Theron was intrigued. Intrigued, Beth repeated flatly. An emperor is intrigued by me. That doesn't sound good. In Kelvorian culture, debts are sacred. Honor and obligation form the foundation of our entire society. When you refused payment for your service, you created something we call a life debt. The royal family is now obligated to you. Beth stood up, suddenly angry. I don't want them obligated to me. I helped some kids fix their toys. I didn't do it to get something out of it. The Chancellor stared at her. You refuse the debt? I'm not refusing anything. I'm saying there is no debt. It was a favor. Humans do favors sometimes. We help people without expecting a reward. The silence that followed was profound. The guards shifted uncomfortably. The Chancellor looked like Beth had just explained that water was actually dry and fire was cold. This concept is unfamiliar to us, he finally said. But Emperor Theron has requested your presence at the Imperial residence. He wishes to discuss this matter with you personally. And if I say no? The Chancellor's expression tightened. That would be unwise. The Emperor does not extend personal invitations lightly. To refuse would be seen as a grave insult. The diplomatic consequences could be severe. Beth looked around her tiny, cluttered shop. She looked at the cargo loader with its half-repaired hydraulic line. She looked at the Chancellor and his guards with their expensive armor and their rigid postures. Do I have a choice? Everyone has choices, Miss Brennan. Some choices simply have more significant consequences than others. Beth grabbed her jacket from its hook by the door. Fine. Let's go meet an emperor. Just let me lock up first. She secured her shop, her hands still trembling slightly. As she turned to follow the Chancellor, she caught sight of herself in the reflective surface of one guard's armor. Her coveralls were stained with grease and hydraulic fluid. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She had a smudge of something dark across her forehead. Should I change? She asked. I'm not exactly dressed for meeting royalty. The Chancellor glanced at her outfit. The children described you as you are. To alter your appearance would be dishonest. The Emperor values truth above presentation. They led her through the station, and Beth became aware of how much attention they were attracting. People stopped and stared. Some pulled out recording devices. By the time they reached the diplomatic docking bay, a small crowd had formed at a safe distance, watching and whispering. The ship waiting for them was nothing like the commercial haulers and personal shuttles that usually docked at Gateway Station. It was sleek and elegant with that same purple and silver color scheme. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, revealing an interior that looked more like a luxury hotel than a spacecraft. Beth stepped inside, and the door sealed behind her with a finality that made her stomach clench. Through the viewport, she watched Gateway Station begin to shrink as they undocked. Her little shop, her quiet life, everything familiar was falling away. The Imperial residence is approximately 20 minutes from here, the Chancellor said. I should prepare you for proper protocol. When addressing the Emperor, you must use his full title on first greeting. You must not speak unless spoken to. You must never turn your back on a member of the royal family. You must. Chancellor, Beth interrupted. With respect, I'm a mechanic from a nowhere station. I don't know your protocols and I'm probably going to mess them up no matter how much you coach me. Maybe it's better if I just be myself and hope your Emperor is as understanding as those kids were. The Chancellor looked like she just suggested they fly directly into a star. But after a long moment he nodded slowly. Perhaps you are right. The children seemed quite fond of your directness. Beth settled into her seat and watched the stars stream past. She wondered what she'd gotten herself into. She wondered if she'd ever see her shop again. And most of all, she wondered if those 3 kids were okay, if they'd gotten in trouble for running away, if they'd thought about the strange human mechanic who'd fixed their toys. She had no way of knowing that those 3 kids hadn't stopped talking about her for 4 days straight. That they'd argued with their tutors about the value of kindness. That they'd begged their father to find her and thank her properly. The shuttle banked, and ahead, Beth saw a massive structure hanging in space. It was a palace, there was no other word for it. Towers and domes and graceful architecture that seemed impossible, all glowing with soft light against the darkness. Welcome, the Chancellor said quietly, to the heart of the Kelvorian Empire. Beth swallowed hard and tried not to think about how thoroughly her simple life had just been turned upside down. Retraced. The palace wasn't just big. Big didn't cover it. Beth had seen space stations that housed 50,000 people, massive cargo ships that could swallow entire city blocks. None of that prepared her for the sheer scale of the imperial residence. The shuttle docked in a bay that could have held 100 ships, and when they stepped out, Beth found herself in a hall with ceilings so high they disappeared into shadow. Everything was purple and silver. The walls, the floors, the banners hanging from impossible heights. Every surface was polished until it gleamed. Guards stood at precise intervals so still they could have been statues. Beth felt like she'd walked into some kind of museum, except museums didn't make you feel like you were tracking dirt everywhere you stepped. Stay close, the Chancellor said, leading her down a corridor that seemed to stretch for miles. The Emperor is waiting in the formal reception hall. Can't we just meet in a normal room? Beth asked. Like an office or something? The Chancellor actually stopped walking. Miss Brennan, you are about to meet the sovereign ruler of 73 worlds. There is no normal room for such a meeting. Beth bit back a reply and followed in silence. They passed through 3 separate security checkpoints, each one more elaborate than the last. At the final checkpoint, guards insisted on scanning her with devices that hummed and beeped. One of them kept frowning at his scanner's readout. Problem? Beth asked. You carry no weapons, no recording devices, no communication equipment? The guard said like this was suspicious. You have nothing. I left my tools in my shop. Didn't think I'd need a plasma cutter to meet an emperor. The guard looked at the Chancellor, who nodded. She is clear. Allow her through. The doors to the formal reception hall opened, and Beth stopped walking entirely. The room beyond was bigger than her entire housing level on the station. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, each one probably worth more than she'd earn in her lifetime. The walls were covered in tapestries depicting battles and ceremonies and things Beth couldn't even identify. At the far end of the hall, at least 100 yards away, sat a throne on a raised platform. And on that throne sat a man with pale blue skin and dark eyes, wearing robes so elaborate they could have been their own work of art. I can't walk all the way down there, Beth whispered to the Chancellor. Everyone's staring. And they were. The hall was filled with people, hundreds of them, all dressed in formal robes and expensive-looking outfits. They lined both sides of a long purple carpet that led to the throne. Every single one of them turned to look at Beth in her stained coveralls and work boots. You must, the Chancellor said firmly. It would be a grave insult to refuse. Beth took a deep breath and started walking. The carpet was so thick and plush her boots sank into it. The silence was absolute except for her footsteps. She could feel hundreds of eyes judging her, finding her lacking, wondering what this dirty human was doing in their perfect palace. About halfway down she spotted them. The 3 kids stood to the left of the throne, wearing formal robes now instead of their torn clothes. But their faces were the same. When the little girl, Princess Amara, saw Beth, her whole face lit up. She started to wave, but the oldest boy, Crown Prince Davith, grabbed her hand and pulled it down. They were supposed to be formal, dignified, royal. Beth reached the base of the platform and stopped. She had no idea what to do next. Bow? Kneel? Salute? The Emperor solved the problem by standing up and descending the steps to her level. Up close, Beth could see he was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40 in human years. He had the same delicate features as his children, but his eyes held a weight that came from carrying enormous responsibility. "Miss Beth Brennan," he said, his voice carrying across the hall without shouting. "We are pleased to welcome you to our home." Thanks for having me, Your Majesty." "Your Emperorness." Beth glanced at the Chancellor, who looked pained. "Sorry, I don't know the right words." Something flickered in the Emperor's eyes. "Amusement, maybe. Your Majesty will suffice. I am Emperor Theron. These are my children, whom you have already met, though under less formal circumstances. Yeah, they came by my shop. Nice kids. You've done a good job with them." Dead silence. Nobody spoke to the Emperor like he was a neighbor discussing parenting tips. The Chancellor made a small choking sound. But Emperor Theron smiled. Actually smiled. "They have spoken of nothing but you for 4 days, Miss Brennan. Prince Davith has attempted to repair 3 household items with limited success. Princess Amara has declared she wishes to become a mechanic. And Prince Kellen has been asking questions about human philosophy that his tutors cannot answer." Beth looked at the 3 kids. They were trying so hard to stand still and formal, but she could see Prince Kellen rocking slightly on his heels, fighting the urge to fidget. "They're good kids," she repeated. "I'm glad I could help them. Which brings us to the matter at hand," the Emperor said, his tone becoming more formal. "In Kelvorian culture, every action creates obligation. When one provides a service, payment must be rendered to maintain balance and honor. You provided an invaluable service, repairing irreplaceable family treasures, and you refused compensation. This has created a life debt." "I've heard," Beth said. "Your Chancellor explained it. But look, I don't need anything from you. I helped because they needed help. That's what people do. That's what humans do anyway." The Emperor studied her for a long moment. "What you describe is alien to us. In our culture, kindness without expectation of return is illogical. How does society function if debts are not tracked and obligations not fulfilled?" "I don't know about society," Beth said. "I just know that if everyone only helped people when they get something back, the galaxy would be a pretty cold place. Sometimes you do things because they're right, not because they benefit you." A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. The Emperor raised a hand and silence returned immediately. "Nevertheless, the debt exists by our law and custom. I am prepared to offer you wealth beyond your imagining. Title. You could become nobility, rule a province, never work another day if you so chose. Name your desire, and if it is within my power, I will grant it." Beth woke up to someone knocking on her door at what felt like the middle of the night. She stumbled out of bed, still wearing the spare clothes the palace staff had provided, and opened the door to find Princess Amara standing there in formal robes, practically vibrating with excitement. "You're here. You're really here. Can we start now?" Beth rubbed her eyes and checked the time display on the wall. "It's 5 in the morning." "Yes. Perfect time. We have 3 hours before morning protocols begin." Before Beth could respond, Prince Davith and Prince Kellen appeared behind their sister, also dressed formally but with the same eager expressions. Beth sighed and smiled despite herself. "All right, give me 10 minutes to wake up." "Meet me? Where exactly?" "I don't even know where we're supposed to do this." "The learning hall," Prince Davith said. "Chancellor Vorin arranged everything. He said you would need tools and materials." 20 minutes later, Beth found herself in what the Kelvorians called a learning hall but looked more like a surgical theater. Everything was pristine white, organized with military precision, and completely impractical for actual repair work. On a long table sat various broken items, each one placed on its own cloth with labels and documentation. "Okay, first lesson," Beth said, looking around the sterile room. "We can't work here." The children looked confused. "Why not?" Prince Kellen asked. "This is where all lessons take place. Because real work is messy. You can't learn to fix things if you're worried about keeping everything perfect." Beth spotted a storage area through a side door. "Come on, let's find somewhere better." She led them through the palace, ignoring the shocked looks from staff members who saw the royal children following a human in borrowed clothes. They ended up in a maintenance corridor, much like the one where Beth's shop was located. The children had never been in this part of the palace before. "This is where the real work happens," Beth said, finding an empty equipment room. "This is perfect." She had them sit on the floor, which horrified a passing maintenance worker who tried to intervene. Beth waved him off. "They're fine. We're just working." She started with basics. how to identify different types of fasteners, how to understand which tool to use for which job. The children absorbed everything like sponges, asking questions that showed they were actually thinking, not just memorizing. Prince Davith had a natural talent for understanding mechanical systems. He could look at how pieces fit together and intuitively grasp the purpose. Prince Kellen was more interested in the why behind everything, constantly asking about design choices and efficiency. Princess Amara had the steadiest hands Beth had ever seen, able to manipulate tiny components with incredible precision. Why do humans fix things themselves? Prince Kellen asked during a break. On Kelvoria, if something breaks, you hire someone to fix it or replace it entirely. Because understanding how things work gives you power, Beth said, helping Princess Amara realign a sensor array. If you depend on someone else to fix everything, you're helpless when they're not around. Plus, there's satisfaction in taking something broken and making it whole again. Like healing, Prince Davith said thoughtfully. Exactly like healing. They worked through the morning, and Beth was so focused on teaching that she didn't notice the small crowd gathering at the corridor entrance. Palace officials, tutors and staff members stood watching the royal children sitting on the floor, covered in lubricant and dust, completely engrossed in repairing a broken environmental control unit. Emperor Theron arrived around midday. Everyone immediately bowed, but Beth was focused on guiding Princess Amara through a delicate wire connection and didn't notice until Prince Davith whispered urgently. "Miss Beth, my father is here." Beth looked up to find the Emperor standing 10 feet away, flanked by guards and advisors. She started to stand, but he held up a hand. "Please continue. I wish to observe." So Beth continued the lesson while the Emperor of 73 Worlds watched his children learn to use basic tools. When Princess Amara successfully reconnected the unit and it hummed to life, she squealed with delight and hugged Beth so hard they nearly toppled over. "I fixed it. I actually fixed it." "You absolutely did," Beth said, grinning. "That was perfect." The Emperor stepped forward. "May I speak with you, Miss Brennan? Privately?" They walked a short distance down the corridor while the children showed their siblings' work to each other. The Emperor clasped his hands behind his back, studying Beth with those dark, thoughtful eyes. "My children's tutors have complained," he said. "They say the children are distracted, that they ask inappropriate questions, that they question traditional teachings." Beth's heart sank. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause problems. I can stop the lessons if you want." "I do not want," the Emperor said firmly. "For the first time in months, my children are excited about learning. They wake early without complaint. Princess Amara has stopped her night terrors. Prince Kellen is eating properly again." Prince Davith smiles. "They're good kids," Beth said. "They just needed something hands-on, something real. They needed someone who saw them as children first and royalty second," the Emperor corrected. "This is what my advisors do not understand. This is what I struggle to explain." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Miss Brennan, I have been thinking about what you said. About helping without expecting return. This concept disturbs me deeply." "Why?" "Because if you are correct, it means my entire civilization has been built on a flawed foundation." He looked back at his children. "In Kelvorian culture, every interaction is a transaction. We track debts across generations. Families have been bound by obligations for centuries. It creates order, yes, but also, wait. Everyone carries the burden of what they owe and what is owed to them." "That sounds exhausting," Beth said honestly. "It is." The Emperor's voice was quiet. "I have been Emperor for 3 years since my father's death. Every day is a calculation of obligations, debts, and political balance. And I have raised my children in this system, teaching them that everything has a price, every kindness must be repaid." He turned to look at Beth directly. "Then you appear and show them something different. You show them that kindness can exist without transaction. That helping others can be its own reward. Do you understand what this means?" "Not really," Beth admitted. "It means you have shown my children a different way to live. And now I cannot unsee it either." The Emperor gazed out a viewport at the stars beyond. "I have been considering your human philosophy. What would happen if we implemented such ideas here? If Kelvorians began performing acts of service without expecting compensation? People might be happier," Beth suggested. "Less stressed about keeping score all the time. My advisors say it would create chaos. That our social structure would collapse without the framework of debt and obligation." "Maybe," Beth said. "Or maybe people would find new reasons to help each other. Better reasons." The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised Beth completely. "I want to try." I want to implement what you have shown us. I am calling it the principle of unattached kindness. Acts of service performed without expectation of reward. You're going to make kindness a law? Beth asked, trying to wrap her head around it. I am going to encourage it as a practice. Beginning with the royal family. My children will be taught both the traditional ways and your human way. They will learn that debts matter, but that kindness matters more. He looked at Beth seriously. This will be controversial. Many will resist. Some will mock it as naive human sentiment. But I believe my children deserve to grow up in a galaxy where they can help someone without calculating the cost. Beth didn't know what to say. She just fixed some toys for 3 kids, and somehow that had led to an emperor rethinking his entire culture's value system. Can you stay? The emperor asked. Not forever, I understand you have your own life. But for a few more weeks? Help me understand this philosophy better. Teach my children. Show us how humans navigate a world without constant obligation. Beth thought about her tiny shop on Gateway Station. Her quiet, simple life. The cargo haulers and mining drones waiting for repair. Then she thought about 3 kids who'd gone from scared and hungry to happy and excited about learning. Yeah, she said. I can stay for a while. The emperor nodded, something like relief crossing his face. Thank you, Miss Brennan. For this and for everything else. You don't have to thank me, Beth said. That's kind of the whole point. For the first time, Emperor Theron laughed. It was a small sound, rusty from disuse, but genuine. Yes, he said. I suppose it is. Retry. Beth stayed for 6 weeks, and in that time she watched something remarkable unfold. It started small. Emperor Theron issued what he called the principle of unattached kindness as an imperial suggestion, not a law. He encouraged Kelvorians to perform 1 act of service each week without accepting payment or creating obligation. The response was immediate and mostly negative. It's absurd, Beth heard one advisor complaining outside the learning hall. How can society function without proper accounting of debts? This human has poisoned the emperor's mind with naive philosophy. But the children didn't care about the controversy. Prince Davith began sneaking into maintenance areas to help repair workers, just to learn more. Princess Amara started a project fixing broken items for palace staff. Prince Kellen spent hours in the archives, researching human cultures and philosophies, writing papers that made his tutors uncomfortable. One morning, Beth found Prince Davith in the corridor outside her quarters, looking troubled. What's wrong? She asked. I tried to help a maintenance worker fix a cooling system yesterday, he said quietly. When I finished, he tried to bow and thank me formally. He looked scared, like he thought he now owed the royal family something. I told him no debt existed, that I just wanted to help. He didn't believe me. Beth sat down beside him on the floor. Change is hard. Especially when people have lived one way their whole lives. You can't expect everyone to understand immediately. But what if Father is wrong? What if the advisors are right and this just creates confusion? Then you keep trying anyway, Beth said. You do what's right because it's right, not because it's easy or because everyone agrees with you. The prince considered this. That's very human of you. Good. Someone's been paying attention in class. 3 weeks into Beth's stay, something shifted. A young palace guard named Torin began helping elderly staff members carry heavy loads without being asked. When they tried to pay him or register a formal debt, he simply said, no debt. Just kindness. Word spread. Other guards started doing the same. Then kitchen staff. Then maintenance workers. The nobles and advisors still grumbled, but something was happening at the lower levels of palace society. People were smiling more. The rigid formality that had governed every interaction began to soften, just slightly. Emperor Theron called Beth to a private meeting in his study, a room much smaller and more comfortable than the throne room. He looked tired but energized, like someone working on a project they believed in. The Galactic Council has noticed, he said, pouring her tea that probably cost more than her monthly rent. 3 ambassadors have filed formal inquiries about our unusual social experiment. The Votharian Collective called it dangerously disruptive to established interstellar protocols. Is that bad? Beth asked. Probably. I don't care. The Emperor smiled, and Beth realized he smiled much more often now than when she'd first met him. Do you know what Princess Amara did yesterday? She repaired a broken toy for a visiting dignitary's child. The dignitary was so shocked he stood speechless for 5 minutes. He couldn't comprehend why a princess would provide service to a commoner's child without creating obligation. What did Amara say? She said, because he's a kid and his toy was broken. Miss Beth taught me that's reason enough. The Emperor's expression grew serious. You've changed my children, Miss Brennan. You've changed me. And now perhaps you're changing my empire. I don't know if history will judge this as wisdom or folly. History judges everything eventually, Beth said. You just have to decide what kind of person you want to be in the meantime. 4 weeks in, Beth got a message from Gateway Station. Her landlord had rented out her shop to someone else, assuming she wasn't coming back. All her tools and belongings were in storage. She had nowhere to go home to. When Emperor Theron heard, he immediately offered her a permanent position as Royal Instructor of Practical Arts, with a salary that made Beth dizzy. She turned it down. I'm not a palace person, she explained. I'm a mechanic. I need grease under my fingernails and real work to do. But thank you. Then take this. He handed her a data chip. Coordinates to a station on the edge of Kelvorian space. There's a repair facility there, fully equipped, waiting for an operator. It's in a busy trade corridor. You'll have plenty of work. The facility is yours, no debt, no obligation. Call it a gift from 3 children who missed their toys being broken because it meant they got to see you. Beth held the chip, feeling its weight. This is too much. Perhaps. But consider it an investment in keeping you close enough that my children can visit. They're already planning a trip to see your new shop once you're settled. Beth stayed 1 more week, just to make sure the children could complete basic repairs without her guidance. On her last day, the whole family came to see her off. Princess Amara cried and made Beth promise to call every week. Prince Kellen gave her a book he'd written about human philosophy. Prince Davith hugged her and whispered, "Thank you for showing us there's more than one way to live." Emperor Theron walked her to the shuttle personally, guards trailing at a respectful distance. Miss Brennan, I need to tell you something. Yesterday, I issued a new imperial decree. Any Kelvorian citizen who performs acts of unattached kindness will be recognized and honored. We're creating a cultural shift, slowly but surely. That's amazing, Beth said. My advisors predict chaos, economic disruption, social upheaval. He paused. I told them some disruption is worth it if it means my children grow up in a kinder galaxy. The shuttle ride to her new station took 6 hours. When Beth arrived, she found the facility was 3 times the size of her old shop, equipped with tools she'd only dreamed of owning. There was living quarters attached, a real apartment with actual rooms and a kitchen. She spent the first day just organizing, setting up her workspace the way she liked it. On the second day, her first customers arrived, merchants whose cargo hauler had a failing navigation system. She fixed it, they paid fair price, everyone was happy. Normal work. Normal life. Except it wasn't quite normal anymore. Because the merchants had heard about her, about the human who'd befriended the Emperor's children. They asked questions. They wanted to know about the principle of unattached kindness. Was it really true that the Kelvorians were changing? I don't know if they're changing, Beth said honestly. I just know 3 kids wanted their toys fixed and things kinda spiraled from there. 2 months after Beth left the palace, she got a call from Emperor Theron. His face on the view screen looked exhausted but triumphant. Miss Brennan, you need to see this. He transferred a data file. It was a news report from the Galactic Network. The report showed Kelvorian aid ships arriving at a disaster site in the Tellurian system. A massive solar flare had wiped out 3 colony worlds' infrastructure. Thousands were without power, water, or medical facilities. The Kelvorian fleet had mobilized within hours, providing assistance without any formal aid agreements, without demanding payment or future consideration. When reporters asked why, the fleet commander simply said, because they needed help. That's reason enough, V.